Hi, this is Nick Dawson, the editor-in-chief of Talkhouse Film, and you're listening to the Talkhouse Film podcast. There aren't really any rules or guidelines for these podcasts. It's simply two interesting people asking each other questions they genuinely want to know the answer to. Usually these conversations take place remotely, but in the case of today's podcast, the two participants, Mary Harron and Rose McGowan, were actually in the same place, in a quiet room at the New York Edition Hotel. Harron and McGowan have more in common than you might initially think. Both spent part of their childhood in Italy. Both are plain talkers who do not suffer fools gladly. Both came to directing as a second phase of their career. Harron after being a journalist, and McGowan following a highly successful period as an actress. McGowan made her directorial debut last year with the smart, stylish short Dawn, which you can now watch online for free. But that's not the only reason she's been prominent in the press recently. When in June she tweeted a note suggesting she wear a push-up bra for a meeting about an upcoming Adam Sandler movie, it caused a media uproar that resulted in her being dropped by her agency. Over the course of their conversation, she and Harron talk about this and much more. From Harron's journalistic roots and her experiences making American Psycho, to McGowan's difficult childhood and adolescence, and her outspoken views about the film industry.
It's not just your body of work, it's your body of life, kind of, that I really respond to. And Johnny Ramone was like one of my best friends.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And I would bake him 2 cakes a week and put them, and I was his chief baker, not as a job, but as just
as a friend.
As a friend. And, when he got sick and he was dying, I would just put them outside his door with little notes. And Linda Ramone, his widow, is like actually my best friend. And I love that part of, you got the first interview with, like Sid and Johnny. That's, and still friends with, oh my gosh, my brain is melting. The drummer.
Oh.
Stevie.
Yes.
Not the drummer, Stevie.
Yes.
Steve Jones. All those people are like awesome, and it's so funny, like, hearing about this New York, in a way, this storied New York that I never quite saw. I remember more like late 90s New York, which was great fun, but it wasn't like what?
It feels, late 90s New York feels a lot more
like
now, old New York than it does
now.
In the last 15 years.
It's very odd.
Yeah,
it's
like,
odd.
It lasted the longest time. Right through the 80s, the East Village lasted the longest time, and then it was gone. I sort of feel the same way about LA, too. I was just in LA and driving up the Sunset Strip where I, spent part of my childhood near there. And it's like, oh my God, it's all high-rise. It's all a mall.
I hate these blocks, ugly buildings
blocks
that they're building, and they use every square footage, every inch. They're literally right on the street. And what are you leaving architecturally? Nothing. You're leaving a box. It makes me kind of insane, to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
And I think the whole point of LA is that it rolls. The whole thing is it has the actual hillsides roll.
Yeah.
To kind of let the topography speak is what should be done. And maybe in New York, it's more like let the people speak.
Yes, and so I still love New York, but it's funny because it lasted so long, kind of Lower East Side Bohemia, that it seemed
faded,
eternal, really. Well, but also
eternal.
Faded, but always
like it was always going to be there.
Yes, it was funny because in the 80s I would be walking down, First Avenue or something, and I'd see somebody. I think, it looks like, that looked like Richard Hell or somebody who used to hang out there. And then I would think, oh no, because they can't be that because they're young and I'm not young anymore. And I'm remembering something from like 10, 15 years ago, but they look just like the people I knew. So it's like a new version kind of had come out of the sea,
right.
The primordial ooze. Like a certain kind of world was reproducing itself. But probably, I don't know if that happens anymore. I don't think it does. I think that's over.
I don't know if there's enough people that are willing to be, is different the wrong word, themselves, off? I don't know, because I was a runaway when I was 13, and I got taken in by 3 trans girls and a stripper named Tina. And I had quite, and I'd always been, like, really pretty punk, and that was my jam, really. I had my own weird like dress style, but in spirit, I would wear like men's like Charlie Chaplin-esque suits and bowler hats, when I was 12, At 13, I was jumping off planes. If they had a layover, I would get off the plane, wherever the layover was, and just disappear, having cops look for you everywhere. And it was kind of like, I got to crisscross mostly West Coast, but bigger parts of the country. And so it would have been like matching up with the period of the primordial ooze that you're talking about. So it's part of that ooze. And it's really, I don't know if people get to have as many adventures in some ways. And I don't know if they want to. I hope they do.
Yeah, yeah. But it was a more lawless city. There were
That's
kind
the
of
thing.
no rules.
Right.
Yeah.
Where is that?
I don't know. I mean, as a parent, it's like, it's great. I have 2 teenage daughters, so it's like New York is a very safe city for them. I can let them run all over. But in terms of.
But I like growing up fast. When people are like, oh, I feel bad you grew up so fast, I'm like, I fucking had a great time.
Where did you go when you ran away? Where was it? What part
I
of
was
town?
actually in Oregon at that point, which is not my favorite place in the world. People always think of it as these like kind of erudite, peaceful hippies, and it's not quite that. There's a bastion of that, but the rest of it I would say is kind of redneck, jacked up trucks, gun racks. And I went a little earlier than that, straight from Italy to backwoods Oregon, with again the rednecks and the jacked up trucks and the gun racks every single day. You're the ugliest thing I ever seen. I'm like, you saw, not seen. And it was kind of navigating. There's just something about me they kind of, and it related to Hollywood later, very much so. Like, there's something about me they just kind of wanted to crush. They don't usually want to actually look at something different and wonder about why it's different or why it speaks differently or why it has a different language, or it's just easier to crush it than to reflect on it and maybe look past the boundaries of your own life. And that was just something, there's that, Survivor show, Outwit and Outlast. It was very, very similar in a lot of ways.
So you were in a kind of, it's funny because a lot of punk I always felt came out of kind of rebellion against hippies, or
I came out I grew up with hippies.
Yeah, so in a way you were an example of that, of kind of a later example of that.
Like, I don't understand exactly what it was, how I knew this, but in the commune I grew up in, like, I would see women's hairy legs and just be kind of horrified, even though I had no frame of reference as to anything other. And it was more a representative of something that, it was like false to me. It was false. I mean, there are people that I have a hippie friend now that's actually done a lot of healing in me in the hippie front, because he's kind of truly what it's meant to embody, and I don't like things that are done as just looks or as just, in a dilettante way or in an artificial, we're supposed to act this way because we look this way kind of thing, because usually whatever they're doing doesn't match up with the image of them as these kind of peaceful, loving things. There are certainly those people, but they can come in any clothing, I imagine. But I did come out like waving red lipstick. I was like, oh no, fuck this. And
everyone was horrified.
Oh yeah, oh God. I mean, I went to the store, I think when I was 12, and I came back with Clairol blue black hair dye and Revlon love that red lipstick, and that was all she wrote. And I was like,
and that was your look for the.
And that was pretty much set the precedent for my life, the template at age 12. It was, I just didn't. I just didn't. I mean, I was reading a lot of the old, like, a lot of old just like kind of like Lisa Fonse-Greaves, like those kind of like people with that black hair and red lips. More like, not so much punk, like fucked up punk. I had a lot of punk friends. I was just always in my own kind of weird, kind of old movie. I studied film with my father loosely since I was 4. So for me, like, I always wanted to look like this. I've never been able to track down the film, but some crazy film I saw in Italy with this nurse who was very beautiful with black hair and white skin and red lips. And she's on the phone talking to this doctor, and he tells her he can't see her anymore. This is all in Italian. So she takes out her red lipstick in the payphone booth, rips her shirt open, and draws it all over her face and her breasts. And I was like, fabulous. I think I was like 4 or 5, and I got very excited about it. I was like, that's amazing. That's what I want to be when I grow up.
Oh, that's great. I think the movies you see very early that you can't quite remember what they were have huge
impact. They
huge impact on you. And sometimes you'll feel that impact years later. When I was 18, I went to Mexico, and I was staying with this Mexican family, and we went to the movies, which is a wild experience in Mexico City. Yeah, and the first one was a film called Night of a Thousand Cats, which is a famously bad horror movie, actually, I have to say.
Amazing.
Like one of the worst movies ever made. And then the second one was an American movie American horror movie called Let's Scare Jennifer to Death, which is an amazing kind of, I guess, early 70s, kind of an early independent film, but it's a horror movie and it's very ambiguous. And I thought about that film for years. It had a big influence on me. And later when I did, Moth Diaries, I was definitely affected by Let's Scare Jennifer to Death. It had a very ambiguous ending, and I think sometimes, and it took me, years to kind of track down what it was that I saw completely like that naively, like what is, but I really liked it. It was very strange. It was like an early independent film, and so you sort of see these things.
The imprint.
Yeah, the imprint.
How Gone with the Wind was deeply imprinted upon me at age 5, but Mammy was speaking Italian.
Oh, that's great. Oh, yes, because I remember
everything's dubbed there.
I remember seeing a Roger Corman film in Italy when I was a kid. Mask of the Red Death.
And everybody's speaking Italian.
Yeah.
But it's so weird, as someone who's been dubbed,
yeah.
It's very funny to see. It's like, you stole my voice. I mean, it is funny, like, how much just, and the countries actually where they speak more English are because they're too poor to dub.
Yeah.
Really, so they have subtitles. And it's fascinating to, like, travel the world. And I was at this drag karaoke show or some random horrible thing in LA, and this kid came up to me, and he had a really thick accent, and I was trying to understand him. And he's this TV show I'd gotten stuck on for a long time. He's like, "Oh, that was on the show Saddam let play in Baghdad." I'm a fugitive, escapee from. I escaped Baghdad in Iraq during this was like 4 years ago, during the war, and we grew up, and that's how I learned English, and that's how I was like, that is so. And of course, I was like, Ude and Kuse know who I am. You don't say.
Yeah, they were huge fans. You're lucky you didn't get kidnapped and brought to. Baghdad
I've had other kidnappings, so why not that one? But yes, I suppose so. That was quite.
Did they say what it was about the show that?
That's the weirdest part. It was 3 girls with powers.
Yeah.
So it's complete.
But that show somehow that one passed. That was.
Which is funny because England, I think, was because it was about witches. Oh my God, was the last country to put it on the air because they were so freaked out about witchcraft.
Yeah, because they
they're funny.
There's a lot of suburban witchcraft in England.
Is there?
Yes, and there's a lot of.
By the way, that's a great title.
Oh,
suburban witchcraft.
And
it's kind of an amazing title for an album.
It all happens in the suburbs, and there's a lot of druids as well.
Right. Well, that makes sense.
A lot of druids, a lot of witchcraft, a lot of fetishism, a lot of rubber fetishism in the suburbs. It's all.
Well, let's talk about Japan in that case.
Yes. It all happens behind closed doors. Yeah.
So I was watching American Psycho again last night, which I'd already seen 3 times, and I was watching it this time very much with an eye to you, and it was interesting. And I was with someone. He's like, "Oh, that's a very Kubrick shot," and I said, "No, it's not. I don't think so. I could be wrong, but I think this is a Mary Harron shot." How do you feel about it? It always annoys me when people are like, "This looks like this and this and this." No, and everybody has influences, but what if it's not? What if it's actually your
I'm okay. I'm okay with that because actually when I met with the DP, I did say it's Kubrick and
But it's
Polanski.
interesting, out of the, which I totally agree with, but out of there's shots that you have where it's almost like Bale is coming forward. Mm-hmm. So it's almost like a convex, like it is the symmetry, but the third part of it, it's not symmetrical. Like 1, 2, 3 back, it's almost like one is forward, pushing in. And then I also really like the distance you kept between him and everybody else.
Yes, and that's just instinctive because I don't sit down and plan my shots in that way. I'm not someone.
No, you're going to say here. You don't know the space until you're there.
No, I'm not big on. I don't really. And on that, I certainly didn't do storyboards, and we barely did a shot list actually. After the first week. The producers complained. They were worried that we were going over, so they said you have to have a shot list. So I would just sit down every night on my own and write a shot list that then everybody ignored. But it kind of helped. I just do shot lists because it helps me go through the script in an
orderly fashion
way. But I come out of documentary, and I really much happier if I can just sit in the space and then decide what the shots are. And I was happy to read that Polanski said the same thing, that that's how he would prefer to work always. And there are other people I know who plan everything out, and I just have to.
I have to have an element of surprise, and the place has to inform it for me.
Yes, I
I
have
had
to
a
be
shot
there.
list
Yeah.
for Dawn, very much so, but it was also because I was very specific with each frame, if that you could freeze it and it would tell its own story. Because I'm also a still photographer, so it was. But it was also because my cues were more actually from the art world for it than other cinema. But it was. But other things I've shot and actually shot myself. When I shoot it myself, it's a lot more free flowing. But I always like go. I'm always shocked by people that don't account for. The house has its own energy. The place has the corner of that room is telling a story, and it's going to look different in your camera. So why not? When they're so rigid,
Yeah.
it doesn't flow.
I mean, what I like to do is sort of do this list and then really just get in there and let them see what the actors do, and yes, and then see how the space feels to me, and how you want to separate the actors. There's a scene, a scene with Christian and the two prostitutes, and I remember the DP, Andrei Sekula, who's Polish, who comes out of that Polish school, which is why it does have that Polish. He was saying, and that one of the girls was sort of gyrating, because Patrick Bateman has said, Christy, not Christy, Sabrina, dance a little. So she's kind of awkwardly dancing, and I wanted it to be very awkward. And the DP wanted to place the camera right in front of the girl with Christian behind her, and I was like, no.
It's too no.
She has to just be dancing awkwardly in the background.
Well, that's also another thing I was going to bring up that I really noticed that you did, and even in the shots where it's Christian, Bale, like, nude or close to nude, like doing a stretching, and having been somebody who was in front of somebody's camera, naked, it was really, there's a really big difference between the camera and the person behind it, usually on behalf of the director, kind of ogling, which takes you, for me, when I watch films like that, out of the movie, because now I'm interpreting the film through this unseen person's eyes, instead of letting something actually be how it is if I was a fly on that wall.
Right.
Which is without the male gaze.
Yeah.
It separates from that. And it wasn't like Christian Bale, when he was, I would have to say, he's on the floor and he's stretching, I was thinking about how, most maybe people I've worked with would be, doing, pans, work. I mean, it's just overkill, and it's too much, and that's not reality. And reality is, it's heightened reality and not reality, it's film, but at the same time, are we not trying to let people into another world, another life, another room, to hear other voices? At the same time, are we not all, I'm an audience member first and foremost, so I've studied audiences forever. As part of one, I studied myself in my reaction to film, and I don't like it. I think a lot of times, most of the male directors I've worked with, they can't quite help themselves from insinuating themselves into it in a way, and sometimes that is in a more male. I'm not castigating them, but they are what they are. So if they're said to be visual creatures, quote unquote, it can get rapey.
Yeah. No, and actually, in this case, also, when Christian was, doing his exercises, there's also something comic about it.
Oh, so funny. And so you have to let breathing room happen for that.
Yeah, and so and comedy plays well in wide shots. The kind of camera lingering or panning. No, it's really funny if he's just there, kind of, fanatically, doing his crunches. That was it. And he was good because he was very sort of relaxed. But I was just packing up we're moving, so I was just packing up my things. I found my old production binder from American Psycho, and there was a picture, a Polaroid inside of Christian, standing by the monitor, covered in blood, kind of grinning with a sock on, and we're by the monitor,
but that's how it should be and is.
Yes,
it's the funniest.
Jokey and yeah, and I think with sex scenes, which are, it's an very embarrassing situation. So you have to kind of be very matter of fact, I think, and as if it's sports.
This is exactly okay, and break.
And break. Yes. And that movement. And this.
That.
In fact, for some of those sex scenes, we wrote out positions and gave them numbers, and then try number 3. Because that kind of had a detachment that was, we weren't.
It's also, he's quite detached. So
yes.
Very well.
We weren't trying to create hot sex scenes.
No, but that sex scene, but but that's what I mean, is that you weren't trying to create hot sex scenes, but a lot of times people, like, all of a sudden, if it was honestly like a different director, it would be like, yeah, I got 2 girls and a guy on the wall.
Yes, my fantasy.
My fantasy, this is my time. This is my moment. And you're like, don't make it the audience's moment. That's not what it's about.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that must be strange for the performer.
Right.
Well,
it's stranger watching it.
Yeah. Because, I mean, after you've done it, you have to then.
Oh, that's uncomfortable. That's the more uncomfortable part, I think. You're like, I managed to be completely detached and kind of fly away, but now I'm here and I'm staring at my detachment, but my body, and then my voice comes out of my mouth, and I hear my sisters. I don't really watch myself ever because it's just too weird.
Yes.
It's not right. I was very good at what I did, but I'm also good at tying my shoes. It was not that different for me.
Yeah.
I'm not somebody, I didn't come out like waving the banner of like, I'm going to be a thespian. And I have mad respect for people that are, and for people that are true actors. And I think I was dedicated to being very good. But that's also like, if I had accidentally wound up in another career, I would also dedicate myself to being very good at that.
Yeah.
So when I basically grew up and had the choice, I was like, oh no, I choose not to do this.
So when you, was it more fun, like in the very early, when you sort of fell into it, like doing Doom Generation, was that more fun because it was so new? And
Well, I did Doom Generation.
I guess you'd acted for quite a bit before. As a kid, no?
No. I didn't know what a mark was. They would say, stand on your mark, and the X. I'd walk across the room. I didn't know what it was. It was 5 weeks after my boyfriend was murdered, and I was discovered 3 weeks after he was killed. And I had nowhere to live, so I did the movie so I could get enough money for rent, and then I had some left over and went to visit Napoleon's summer house outside of Paris. It was hard work, but it trained me very well. It was like boot camp for sets and boot camp for acting. I mean, I've calculated I've spent over 57,000 hours on sets.
Oh.
So it's in no way, and then having had the kind of peripatetic but fairly thorough film education I did, and then so when I was discovered, I was like, well, I guess this makes sense. I was film. I love film. I know, It's like one of my main passions. And then it was just kind of contractually, a lot of things happen that you can't get out of. And then you feel very, very guilty, very bad when it doesn't. My people are so excited about this whole job. What is wrong with me? Mm-hmm. What is wrong? I do not feel I'm miserable. Mm. I hate being forced to go outside of my body. Yeah. I hate having to leave my brain. And I would have to abandon it, like 15, 16 hours a day. Yeah. And because even when you're not in the moment, you're on a set, you're not you. You're not thinking your thoughts particularly. You're thinking like thoughts around 100 people. And it was just something that was particularly stifling, and it was choking the life out of me. It was just, I actually hated it.
Hated acting.
I hated it. I didn't hate the acting part of it. I hated the trade-off. I hated having to leave my body and my mind for something else that I was playing that frankly wasn't as interesting or dynamic as my own brain.
And then being in
it was very bothersome. And then also the often very cruel things that were going on behind the scenes. I was like, wait, so how is this supposed to be cool? Like good? I was on a Tarantino film, and I was like, this is like, what is wrong with me? Everybody else here is so happy to be here, and I'm fucking miserable. I didn't act that way, because you act like you're thrilled to be there, and then you act in the movie, so you're just acting all the time, and which is quite exhausting. And I bring it, I give like 150%. And not with him, but with other people sometimes you're like, but they're not. They're kind of a lot of people, like, some directors that were like totally half-assed it, and I'm like, that's not fair. You like can't only pay attention to 2 departments on your film and like, oh, I hired a great production designer, he'll do it. Oh, I hired this person, they'll do it. No, your fingers need to be on every single part of it. Every single part is you. You are responsible. I wouldn't, and so for me, like it was just like having no voice. So Dawn came out of realizing really that what I was doing was so many people's dreams, and you collectively feel that. You go into a restaurant in LA and you have the hostess like kind of glaring at you because she would want to put an ice pick through your head to do what you're doing. And to which I would say, here's your ice pick. Go for it. It's okay. I don't, and I kind of had to come to terms with the fact that it was everybody else's dream but not mine. I'd never formed the dream, so to speak. I had formed being very good at whatever it was I did, but I also have a bunch of other jobs that I do that I'm also quite good at.
It's strange for people who grew up on movie sets and how that affects your...
I grew up part-time. I had a very strong sense of self from like as early as I can remember. Like never, my aunt met me when I was 3. She came over from America to Italy. She said she's never met anybody who's changed less in their life. She said that's not a good thing necessarily. I've just never met anyone who's changed less in their life, personality-wise. And so it was always me, but I resented. I just didn't like, it just didn't sit well with me, but somehow it just kind of kept going. And I have 7 brothers and sisters, and I could help them and put them through college and do all sorts of things.
And you emancipated yourself, right?
I did. I took myself to court when I was like
how did you?
and a half.
I was because everybody kind of goes through phases where they want to emancipate.
No, I represented myself in court.
How were you able to do that? Who told you that you could do it? And how did you find out?
I read about it.
Yeah.
I read about it, and I just wanted autonomy. The thing is that if someone's not doing right by you, why should they have control over you and your decisions and your life? And I was certainly. I had like 25 cents to my name. It wasn't out of.
So you weren't able to. Did you have to prove that you were financially self-sufficient, or they just let you?
I think I just conned them into it. I was just myself. It wasn't a con. In fact, the judge said I'd represented myself better than any self-represented person he'd had. I think it was really just about. I just wanted freedom. That's the number one thing I've looked for and wanted my whole life. And my parents were very, my great-grandmother, when she was, just after the Depression, ran away from home at 13 and set off cross-country on trains. It's something in my family. We're all, have this intense wanderlust, and I just couldn't be bound to one place and one life.
And your parents were like, what? No.
Not really.
Yeah.
They were like, oh, Rose. Okay, if that's what you want to do. My dad's nickname for me, which I wasn't, for some reason, allowed to know about until he died. He told my sisters not to tell me. He was a kook. He called me the brave one. That was my nickname. And I was kind of born with a fist up and a sword in the other hand. And
so you emancipated in Oregon.
I was actually in California at that point, legally, because I wanted to have, I like the rights, the laws in California better. And you didn't have to be 16 to be emancipated, like in Oregon. Mm-hmm. So what I did was I would turn myself in at a police station, and I would tell them I was from X place that I wasn't from, and they would buy me a bus ticket to get me home. And so then I crisscrossed the country that way, a lot of the country, by just repeatedly turning myself in at police stations. Then I just had a whole network of ways to get around based on crying in a police station saying I was a runaway and wanted to go home.
And they didn't call your parents, or?
No, because I said they moved. I only know the town they live in. They just don't know what to do with you. They want to get rid of you.
Oh, wow, that's very, very inventive. You should do a film about
There's a lot.
That life. So that's really creative. So you would just go, you tell your story. Would they give you a sandwich? Would they put you on a Greyhound bus with a sandwich? And
a sandwich from the vending machine and a new life.
And how many, so did you say, oh, I want to go to...
Boise. I'll go to Boise. Oh, okay, I've been here 4 days. This sucks. Let's go to Portland. Okay, this sucks. Let's go to, Utah. That really sucks. Okay, let's go.
So you finally worked your way towards...
California.
And where did you end up there?
Los Angeles, actually. There's something about the topography of California in general. Because I traveled the coast up and down a bunch on the bus. And I just fell in love with the rolling hills, the trees, and just... my favorite place I lived other than that, besides Italy, was Colorado in the mountains, and I've just always had quite a thing for them. And I
Where did you live in LA when you got there?
I rented a room for $300, and I lied somehow. I don't even understand how this happened. I lied to this medical company, this medical PR firm I saw an ad for that they wanted, and a junior account executive. I don't know what the fuck that is. And so I invented that I was a graduate of the USC Corporate School of Communications. And
how did
I don't even know what that is.
How did you come up with that?
I don't know, and I don't even think it exists. It just sounded really
they didn't
good.
ask for proof or anything?
No.
And you were 15 or something?
I was 14 and a half.
And what
They had a 14-and-a-half-year-old talking to Bristol Myers Squibb people on the phone, dealing with their breast implant scandal at the time.
and how long did this last?
That one lasted for about like 8 months, and then I got fired. But that was the longest job I ever had before I got fired. Every other normal job I ever had, I've gotten fired from quite quickly.
And you would go to an office, and
I would go to this office, which was miserable, and every day they would bring me in and lecture me that I wasn't dressed like appropriately for an office, because I was like, I would basically imitate what I thought an office person would wear. So it was just like these kooky outfits that I was coming up with from like Goodwill, or
what would you wear? Like
I would get a cowl neck turtleneck, those turtlenecks with the really big 70s funnel necks, and cut it and wear it as a mini skirt with black tights, black combat boots, Doc Martens, so they weren't too egregious, and then like a men's button-down shirt, but it was always like kind of wrinkly, or I don't know. I didn't look like whatever they looked like. I didn't understand. I mean, but it was just more amusing. It was just the con, really. It was just the con.
And were you good at this? I'm just fascinated
very
about
good.
how you managed to
very,
survive for
very
8
good.
months.
I was very good. Well, frankly, oftentimes I felt quite smarter than most of the people, the doctors, and the people I had
And
to
you
talk
didn't know
to.
anything about this world or this business.
No, but I'm heavily adaptable.
And
But it takes about 2 days to figure it out. It's not that complicated.
And why did you get fired in the end?
Because of my dress, the way I dressed. I dressed. What was the line? You dress like it's casual Friday every day. And I said, "Oh, thank you. I don't want to work." But it was just enough money to get a little car, which you need in LA, and then that was that, And then I had another adventure for 3 years, and then I met this great guy, and then I was going to enroll at UCLA, and then he died, and then I became famous. But there's a lot of stuff before then. I lived a lot of lives, a lot of chapters way before. So when people are like, "Is Hollywood the weirdest thing that's happened to you?" I'm like, not by a long shot.
No, I mean, probably.
It's the longest thing that's happened to me,
Yeah.
but not necessarily the weirdest. It's sometimes the most asinine thing that's happened to me. And it's weird when you come from, like, my parents are very, very, very smart people, and like hyper educated and very eccentric, flamboyant, fabulous, hard, difficult, self-indulgent people, but that they always spoke the truth. So that's one problem I had in Los Angeles. I really did think people were telling me the truth, because I didn't understand why. It just didn't even occur to me that somebody would lie.
Yeah.
Like, I just didn't understand why. I still don't quite understand why. Like, what's the gain? What's the upside of this? Like,
And they were
why?
children of God, right? Your
Yes.
parents? Do you feel? It's funny because I have other friends I'm close, that I'm close to, who grew up in cults, basically.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that? Are you annoyed with them, or do you feel that was just part of the time, or?
Well, it certainly was part of the time. It's very, very difficult to look at it from, now. My father's coming he got dishonorably discharged from going to Vietnam because he acted so crazy. I mean, he must have acted really crazy, because he really did not want to go. And it's funny because I work a lot with veterans and things like that, so I have like this deeply patriotic streak. My father was patriotic about America, but very anti-authority, and his father was Navy, and like, we eat dinner at 1900 hours, or like that kind of thing, and you have to think these people really did, in their naivete in a very different time, think they were changing the world, which is for us now at this stage, looking back, like, well, good luck with that. But it was, the idea is quite beautiful. In practice, absolutely not. And like anything it was kind of like growing up in the Medici court. Intrigue, overthrows, like people would it was very, very, it was like political intrigue, basically. I grew up in a very stressed, there was no safety.
That's the
safety has been something that's
I get.
lacking in my life. Like that's never happened.
There
has been no safe place to land.
Yes.
Hollywood wasn't that place either.
No, for sure.
Hollywood was not that place.
No, for sure. No, it's interesting. When I was at college, and I was in England, I wanted to be a writer when I left college. Or at the most, I thought maybe I would write films. I hadn't got my mind around actually directing for many years. But I was going to be, and then I met the Children of God at I think, Waterloo Station or Paddington Station, wherever I was getting the train back to college, because they would do these recruiting things.
I know.
And I was a very sort of cynical young woman, really, and suspicious of all this stuff. So, but I was very fascinated by them. And at one point, when I left college, for the first year, I thought I was going to write a book about cult. I was very fascinated by Children of
If you
God.
don't mind
and
my
then-
asking, what year do you think that was?
Oh, this was like 75, 76,
I mean, that
75,
seriously could have
75.
actually been my parents, because my parents were in England.
Oh, well, see,
I was
maybe
conceived in,
maybe it was your dad I
my
talked
dad was
to.
restoring Lady Jane Grey's castle, like just how they get it.
Well, maybe I talked to him at Paddington Station.
How odd.
And they were very, friendly and nice, but it was like,
There's a thing.
there's a thing. There's a thing.
There's a thing.
And then I actually got very interested in Unification Church, which was very big here when I moved to New York after college. And I actually went through their 3-day training program so that I could sort of undercover, so I could write about it. But then it got too much for me, and then I discovered punk rock and
You're like,
abandoned
fuck that.
fuck that. I abandoned my book on cults. But it was a very interesting.
I'm writing the origin story of
Experience.
what I grew up in.
I think that's a really. I think it hasn't been really.
No, it hasn't.
written
Nobody's
about
done
enough.
it.
Yeah.
No, and nobody's really quite done it right, because it's from an outsider perspective of somebody studying it. So it's empiric evidence. It's very different if you grew up in it. My father ran the Italian chapter.
Yeah.
My first and earliest memory is being 3 years old and having somebody, which they would do every night, and I was just so bored of it. Every night they would come and sit on the end of the bed and say, "Have you let God into your heart today?" And I would say, "No." And as I reasoned to myself, it wasn't that I didn't believe in God. I didn't believe in their God. And if I did say I believed in God, then they would mistakenly think that I was in line with what they were doing, and that was not okay. I think when I was 4, I lit a wall of Bibles on fire. I was like very I was like, this is a load of horse shit, basically, from a very early age, and I was always in trouble. I lit a barn on fire. Like, I would just light everything on fire.
That's a good thing. I think that's a good quality to survive
I think so.
a cult,
Just
because
light 'em on fire.
I think it helps to be anti-authority, because in the end
I've been
they're very
anti-authority.
authoritarian.
Very authoritarian, and it's a patriarchal system that benefits the man. I mean, in so many different ways, and I feel so bad for my mother, who was an 18-year-old girl taken into another country, and her mom died when she was pregnant with me, like a year later, and now she's in a fucking cult. Like, how the hell do you get out of that? I mean, it's really. And then my father was allowed to have more than one wife, and it's just very patriarchal. So who does this benefit? The man. But that's one of the reasons Dawn was so. I've always been quite fascinated by women in that age group. She would have been a little younger than Dawn, but had the same kind of drilled into that it's about being pleasant, polite in all things, so you can ultimately.
Yes, you're going
Which
to be
my mother-
easygoing. I like that.
Easy-
Look,
that's
I'm easygoing.
Yeah,
and
that's a real interview. That's a Tab Hunter really gave that interview. And I've
that's-
often wondered how much damage that little interview did. You never know who reads these things.
From closeted gay man.
From a
yeah.
closeted gay man. I mean, that was the
Yeah.
whole thing. And the other man she mentions in the movie is Rock Hudson.
Yeah.
The movie. So that was very pointed and on purpose. But it's just the ideas of what men do to girls, what women do to girls, and then we set them out there in the world with absolutely no protection.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that was more like my mother, set out in the world with no protection, because she was meant to be pleasant in all things. And next thing she knows, she's being pleasant in a cult, because all of a sudden the sexual revolution happened, and you're not cool unless you're with all you're hanging with the guys. And meanwhile, earlier you've been programmed to be pleasing.
No, I found that. I think that part of the anger that I think punk tapped in for me, and the which I did feel very much was a reaction, even though it had a lot in common in a way with hippies, but it was also very intense reaction against it, was this sort of exploitation that had happened. And I loved in a way that punk was kind of, in a way, early punk was kind of asexual. Do you know what I mean?
It was androgyne, very
the
much
girls were very androgyne. Tina Weymouth and Patti Smith, they were very androgyne, and that was also true of the early, the English polystyrene and all those people. Because the pressure, to be the good hippie girl, because I was kind of grew up.
What's the fucking difference between being the good girl in LA, like the girl with the long hair that twirls on the ends, with the like this, with the big eyes, and you're so intelligent, you're so this, you're so that. It's all a mirror to some dipshit who doesn't deserve it, frankly.
Yes, and it was also the idea of what is the great hippie chick? She's someone who doesn't cause problems.
Mm-hmm.
She's cool with everything, and she
but
will
that
have
really
sex
is Dawn.
have sex with everyone.
Right, that's Dawn. But they were raised in that kind of, usually in that environment, maybe not as upper class or something like that, but to societally, the messages they got.
Yeah.
And certainly, but then all of a sudden this revolution, quote unquote, happens, but it's still completely benefiting the men.
Yes. And all the 60s cults, I think every single one,
completely.
it was run by some middle-aged guy, basically.
Oh, this is like a middle-aged Jewish man.
Yeah. Well, I think they all were.
I mean,
pretty much.
It's not funny.
Yeah. Well, maybe not Manson wasn't Jewish, but but they were all, basically it was this one
It was
guy.
all benefiting them.
All for his benefit.
All for his benefit, all for his sexual gratification and his like perverse gratification and control issues and it's very, very strange. We escaped. We escaped. I ran through a cornfield one night.
With the whole family?
No, my dad left my mother in it. And I escaped with my father and some of my brothers and sisters and his other wife. And this dude chasing after us with a hammer.
Wow.
Yeah, it was very filmic. I remember thinking...
In Oregon or
No, this is Italy.
In Italy. Wow.
Through a cornfield, thunder and lightning, like the corn stalks whipping my face. Like, yeah, there's a lot.
Wow, that's a
lot of memories.
That's a good scene.
I filmed everything in my head.
Yes, yes.
At a very early age, I filmed everything.
Yeah.
I was always outside of my body, but that's usually the safe refuge, isn't it? You float up above.
Yeah.
When you have trauma, you're above and you watch. But that serves you well for directing.
I always feel like if you're going into film, you're going to direct, you should try and have a difficult childhood because it really does prepare you.
It's just so banal otherwise, I think, in some ways. Like, what they draw upon is, like, seriously, that's your problem? That's what you're going to do?
But I find also it's like, well, really, what can you do to me that didn't already happen? Or
There's a couple things that I'd managed to protect myself from happening and then later happened in Hollywood, and I was like, really? Seriously?
Well, I think also if you're a performer, it's much, much harder.
It's much harder.
Yeah, because I think if you're a director, that you may have to go through certain, humiliation or rejection, but you're not going through the kind of behavior that a performer, an actress will.
There's I said this recently, but I was talking to this woman, and she's like, oh, I'm the head of human resources for stars. And I was like, whoa, what's that like? What's that like to have a human resources department where you can actually, like, say something? Or, again, it's not easy to do that, I'm sure, but there is no such thing. It is a cloak of silence. There is a veil, and behind that veil, a lot of nefarious and bad things are done.
Yes. And do you think there's
to a lot of girls.
Any movement towards stopping that?
I am.
I saw your thing about the audition.
Oh, that was just so stupid.
Yeah.
That was funny that people freaked out about it,
Yeah.
or like because I was like,
well, so actually, I was like, really, this happens all the time.
yeah, exactly. I was like, oh, this is what you're upset about?
Why is everybody surprised?
I just thought it was more
seems
like stupid and amusing.
Yeah, it's amusing. It
was like a bon mot, if you will. It was just like a funny thing.
Because
but then it turned into this whole thing, and then I actually did think deeper about it, and you're like, they're right actually. Even though this is not this is like a baby iota of what the crap that I've dealt with. Like, this is nothing. Like, you think that's something? That's just a Tuesday at 11 a.m. Like, you have no idea. Dark stuff that's risen to the level of criminality, for sure. And I've never had any protection there. None.
Yes, and you didn't get protection from your representative?
Oh, God, no.
Yeah, that's, I think, is very sad.
Never. No. Never, in fact, had a lot of... most of the really bad things that happened to me there were because they orchestrated it. And some people, some people are treated, some actors are treated with kid gloves and are protected, or actresses. Not me. I don't know what it was.
I think it's interesting because looking into old Hollywood, like Katharine Hepburn, I think never had to deal with any of this. But I think there's class elements to this. If you're connected.
Correct. I had no connections. I had no protection. I came out of nowhere, and I did it backwards. Within a year I was famous, and within a year I was on the cover of Interview magazine, and then within 2 years I was like, how do you get out of this?
Yeah.
How do you stop this? How do you become unfamous? So I spent the last 7 years really dismantling a lot of that.
It was funny when I was young in New York and writing about punk, which I did for free because then I had all these jobs. One of the jobs I had was being a researcher. It was a great job in a way, researcher for a movie that was being done. I had a friend who connected me with, I think it was Columbia Pictures. I can't remember which one, and. I had to go and have a meeting as this young researcher with this the big executive, and then we went to Juilliard's to go and I only had this one meeting. Had to sort of interview me. And while I was staying in his office, he like came up behind me and like said, "I'm going to like crack your back or something." It was like doing this weird thing to me. And then we were in his limousine, and like his hand was like all going up my leg, and I'm like plastering myself.
You're like literally on the side of the wall.
I was literally on the
basically.
side of the thing, like, okay, and I rang my friend who set this up and said, "Look, this happened." He said, "Oh, don't turn your back on him." Or whatever.
You're like, "Give me a heads up, jerk."
Yeah, and so and I remember thinking at the time, well, I can, this is just a research job. I can walk out anytime. It doesn't matter.
I couldn't. I was under contract.
No, and it's like I can walk out anytime. It doesn't matter. What would it be like? I thought, if I was a young actress.
You're screwed.
You're screwed. I was really I was sort of so stunned because here I was, somebody who was, recommended by a friend, or by the the screenwriter friend, and it's like, and they did behave like that to me, who came in as this person who was doing academic research, basically. That's
imagine what it is when they don't respect you in any way.
Imagine if and if you actually need the job, need them. It was horrifying.
It is horrifying. It's a very dark place. It hasn't changed. That hasn't changed. About 3 years ago, I came back to LA and I was like, maybe I'll act again. I need to maybe I'll get an agent, manager, I don't know. So I meet with this guy, and at the end of the meeting, after he's done showing me pictures of his baby, and this ugly little short man, of course, stuck his tongue down my throat.
Ooh.
And I was like, still? This crap is still?
Still?
What? Still? Still?
That's incredible.
Still? And then I saw him when I did eventually go with another agency, and he then got employed there, and of course looked at me like and shook his head and like turned away, like as if I was the dirty one. I was like, "You son of a bitch. You son of a bitch." And that's called a Wednesday.
Yeah, yeah.
It's gross.
Yeah.
And the thing is, for me, it's like I didn't join the mafia when I joined your ranks. I did not take a vow of silence. And it was really, really particularly strange for me because it was very hard to square in my mind because I didn't go there with that hole in my chest that was only going to be filled by fame. Right. I didn't go there with this thing. I did it because I needed to earn a living, and my number one fear in life was being homeless again.
Right.
And being hungry.
Well, I hope the TV show took care of that.
I used a lot of it to take care of my father's health care.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think if you can look at it that way, and
there's a lot of ways to look at it. It just was it's just a fight, It's a fight, and some of the most egregious things done to me were setups by women, and completely.
Why do you think that was?
I jealousy, trade, trading favors. Trying to get, like, maybe their male client a job off my back. I don't really know. And these were people that took copious amounts of money from me. And
so you feel like, were they worse, do you think? Or you feel
in some
more
ways, because I think the no. What they did was criminal. Worse, yes. Worse in a way, because, and I was talking to a guy the other day, and he was saying, a really nice guy, and he was saying, like, he didn't understand why sometimes, not all the time, but he would hire women. He's like, I hire women because I like the way they think, and I like them for who they are. And then sometimes they work their way up in the ranks, and it's also a very traditional thing in Hollywood to, well, can't beat him, join him, like, kind of thing. And I'm going to out boys club this boy, and I'm going to show how good I am in that way. But that's not the way to be good.
Yeah.
That's just the way to be an average asshole.
Yeah.
And a mercenary person who's out for your own, buck. And they don't. I mean, the amount of stupid things I've had said to me, the amount of times I've been touched inappropriately, and I'm just talking that worldwide. I'm not even discussing. Like, once you then become well known, you're literally an object to be discussed by. I was at Home Depot 3 weeks ago, and this guy walks by me. He's like, "You're much fatter in real life." And I'm like, "How thin am I supposed to be? And thank you for discussing my body like it's a coffee table."
How?
That's just, again, a Thursday.
Yeah.
So I really don't take it anymore. I don't take it. I no longer am willing to vacate the premises of my body and my mind to make others feel like they have an easier time of it. If I need to push back, I'll push back. Basically, I feel like I just kind of want to do a chiropractic adjustment on the mind. And you can do those quite quickly, You can do it quickly. A lot of times people don't have really evil intent They're just so used to the status quo and how it's done. So when I meet those people that don't have evil intent, I kind of like reprogram them really quickly.
You call them on it.
Not just call them on it, like show them like an example, what it is, how it feels, this and that. Like, oh, and then they change hopefully for the next person. You know, my main goal is really just to give somebody, like, shine a light so the person in the dark behind me can see it, because I had no light.
Yeah.
Other than my own, and I had to fight for that.
I think that's
Yeah.
like that's that really. Great, that was really fun.
That was really fun.
This is Nick Dawson from Talkhouse Film, and you've been listening to Mary Harron and Rose McGowan on the Talkhouse Film podcast. The episode was engineered by David Gorin and edited by Elia Einhorn. For more filmmakers talking film and TV, visit thetalkhouse.com/film. Subscribe to Talkhouse Film and Talkhouse Music podcasts on iTunes, where you can find all our previous episodes. And while you're there, please rate and review if you can.
I always notice on podcasts they start rolling before they tell you.
Yes, and then you say
7 minutes later, like, are you taping me?
Yes, there'd be crazy things are being said.